Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. Today I'm welcoming Eric DeGatti, Dr. Nathan Denning, and Dr. Justin Tallard onto the podcast. We're going to be discussing all things related to baseball. So, load management, return to sport, various trends that we see in youth baseball, and so on. So, we cover a lot of different topics in about an hour, and this is a phenomenal episode. And we have such a great supporting cast here today between Eric, Nate, and Justin. They really do a great job of offering various insights and various looks on the sport of baseball. So I know you're going to love this episode. Enjoy. Eric, Justin, Nate, super excited to work with you all today. I'm really excited to dive into the sport of baseball. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
For people who might not be familiar with the three of you, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and your background, backstory, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us on. My name is Justin Tallard. I'm the minor league rehab coordinator for the Philadelphia Phillies. This will be my second season in the role. Prior to that, I completed a sports residency program at Houston Methodist, where I had the awesome opportunity to work with Rice University Athletics, the Astros, and like the Houston Rodeo and Ballet, and just a really diverse group of athletes there, and came on with the Phillies in 2022, and have just been here since and been really thankful for the experience.
Thanks for having us, man. So my background's on different areas of sports. I graduated PT school in 2016, went on to a sports residency down in University of Evansville, in pro rehab in Southern Indiana. And from there, kind of went into a role with Exos for human performance, rehab, and working with the guys from off-season rehab from all kinds of professional sports, and then also working with a lot of guys training for the NFL Combine, and then also kind of like our special operations guys. And then from there, did that for 2 or 3 years, and then went down to Fort Myers with the Minnesota Twins for a year, and worked with their rehab staff and known players as kind of a rehab and reconditioning specialist, working on movements, clear pain mechanical faults for their hitters and pitchers while working on the rehab side as well. And then that past year came up and started my own thing, integrated performance, where it's a little mix of performance and rehab up here in Carmel, Indianapolis, Indiana.
Well, I guess I'm the old man of the group here. So I'm going on year 25 in the field, and I've kind of covered a lot of road during that time. Owned my own facility here in New Jersey for 12 years, multidisciplinary center that had kind of a little bit of everything, and then been training athletes in performance, primarily based in baseball, softball, as well as football. I spent 9 years as a training consultant to the New York Football Giants, as well as on the other side, the other hat I've worn as an educator, working as a lead instructor for functional movement systems since 2006, I think, 2005, as well as developed my own curriculum with something called Principles of Program Design. So kind of seen it from all different angles.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like the combination of the three of you, from strength and conditioning side and so much experience and knowledge on the sport of baseball, combined with someone who has been in the realm of Major League Baseball and is now seeing things from more of a private practice side, all the way up to someone who's currently very involved in the long-term rehabs in, the professional baseball level. I think you three make a really great trio. And I feel like we're going to have a great discussion today about so many different things relating to the sport of baseball that impact our youth and our professional athletes. And, the first thing I've noticed about the sport of baseball is it's very unique in that you're playing about 162 game season at the professional level, right? Your spring training starts in February, March, and you're potentially playing, if you make the playoffs, into the month of October. So it's a very long season. There's a lot of games and not a whole lot of downtime or rest during the season. How do you guys go about doing that whole load management thing during the season? How do you go about making sure that guys are getting, their strength training, their reps in, staying on top of injuries without overcooking them because they're doing so much, from the sport demand itself?
My role, I'm not necessarily involved a ton with the in-season team. So as the minor league rehab coordinator, I kind of manage, longer term injuries, guys that get hurt and are going to miss time for, like 6 to 8 weeks. But obviously, within my role, I have a little bit of an understanding as to how we attempt to manage, extensively long seasons, and then the fact that these guys just like never take any time off. And I think, like you said, baseball is really unique, especially for pitchers, where they're doing one exact movement over and over and over again, and they do it all the time, and their training to do that is throwing, right? Like you have to throw to be able to pitch, and they just get so much load and so much volume. So really it's a coordinated effort between strength and conditioning staff, mental performance staff, athletic trainers, and physical therapists to track, like a number of different metrics that we find important, from, like throwing volume, throwing intensity, all the traditional things that you think of. So we're having, constant discussions as to where guys are at, how they're feeling, how they're responding, subjective things that they maybe report to somebody that doesn't have anything to do with making a medical decision, to kind of like stay in tune with our athletes and see what they need in that moment, and how we can get them through an entire season. And in all honesty, it's a lot of planning and a lot of adjustments on the fly to be able to do so.
The one piece I would add, Dan, is I think from the load management perspective is sometimes we take a very myopic, like short range view of that. We look and say, okay, well, this guy, he just threw 100 pitches. What's the problem? Or even at the younger levels, I don't understand. The pitch limit is this. Why can't he throw more? Because they're not looking at the total load over the course of the span of a year or even a career that led up to that day. And so considering that, whether it's at the highest level, did this guy play winter ball? Did he, how many innings did he throw in the spring? Was he trying to make the team having high effort innings leading up until the season, as opposed to this is a veteran who was just kind of working on their stuff? All that stuff has to calculate into load management. And at any level, that's one of the biggest arguments that you have to have with people, is to understand that, we get caught up in that there's these magical pitch limits of 100 pitches at the highest level, or going down to the youth level down to say 85 for little league kids. And you don't quite get that, oh, well, it's not a magic number at 85 where this is safe and this is not. And it's not also that 85 is the same for every kid every day at every point of the season. So when you're talking about even college players, like, did they play in a summer league? How many innings did they log in a summer league? I think we need to take a more broad approach in terms of how we look at load management, and look at it over the span of an entire calendar year, as well as even in the span of their lifetime, of how much have they logged leading up until this. Is this a multi-sport athlete? Is a single sport athlete? There's, as Justin mentioned, like, there's a lot of things that have to go into these decisions, as opposed to what happened today.
I think that's awesome right there. And what I would kind of piggyback on some of that, would, like Justin was talking about, some of the objective data that you see on things. You can be looking, if you're looking at the now and then, as far as are they getting fatigued right now? There's a lot of different metrics that we can look at, from either like grip strength, shoulder strength, total arc and shoulder, or even movement characteristics, that if a guy starts getting fatigued, they might start losing that at that time point. But then making the adjustments is from what we can control, obviously, pitch count. Eric just touched on pitch count, and different pitchers throwing 85 might be different compared to one to another. But we can make the adjustment as far as how many pitches they can throw, or what our strength conditioning looks like from them from a load standpoint, based off if their grip strength's down 20 pounds in 1 week, we can probably, if that doesn't recover in a day or two, we can probably say that we can kind of say that they're maybe a little bit too loaded at that time. And then try to mix up some variables to see if we can get them to recover a little bit more there. And then if you're looking at a short term or anything, this almost like periodization from a weekly standpoint, when they're pitching, making sure they're doing the proper restoration recovery strategies right after they pitch and the day after, and as well as preparing themselves for the next time, can really go a long way.
Your point on the grip strength metric there, Nate, you mean to tell me that if someone's grip strength is down 20 pounds, you're not going to send them into a guy like Eric there and tell him to bench press him 8 sets to failure or something like that? I mean,
Well, I'm gonna let Eric talk on that one.
oh man, no, I love those points that you brought up there, and Justin really hit on the importance of the collaboration that goes into this. Is it's not just one individual taking the reins on this, it's your PTs, your strength coaches, ATs if you have them, your pitching coach, your athlete themselves. There's a lot of different factors that you have to kind of juggle in order to stay on top of keeping them right all season long. Justin, how do you guys go about doing that at the professional level? And then Eric and Nate, how have you guys been able to do that in more of the private sector level? You know, how are you able to kind of connect with maybe like the high school pitching coach or the, you know, the local travel team coach and kind of bring everyone together?
You know, it's a lot of time commitment, right? Like we probably spend more time talking about athletes than we spend with athletes at this point, especially in my setting. It's us having daily meetings, daily phone calls, weekly, like larger meetings where we're getting more into the weeds on things, to just, you know, discuss how guys are doing, if we're on track and meeting our goals that we've set, and if we need to adjust those goals or if we're missing something. So in all honesty, it's a ridiculous amount of time spent planning and having conversations with different departments. And then on top of that, having like systems set up to where we can like fall back on those things, right? Because we're all human. At the end of the day, we're going to forget little things. And if we don't have like a routine or like checks and balances as to what we're doing, like we're not really going to be able to thrive, and we'll lose the like attention to detail that we're trying to like strive to create and to drive excellence, right? So we were talking a little bit earlier about how like this being my second season here, we feel like we're like running on all cylinders because we've been able to take the time to like put out fires and have an off season to come together and say, how can we do this the best way, and what way can we have multiple channels of communication so that nothing gets missed. And that just comes from like a lot of time, and fortunately, you know, like I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that are smarter than myself and have a lot more to contribute. So it's really awesome to be able to lean on their expertise and go to them with questions and like leave my ego at the door and say like, hey, what do you think about incorporating this, or how do you think this guy's doing, or what are you seeing from your perspective, and then take that in front of you through my lens. So at the end of the day, I'll go back to it's a lot of time and commitment and communication and making sure that we're all on the same page, and asking questions to double check that over and over again.
The biggest challenge in the private sector, and I'm curious to hear what you think, Nate, is that you'd hope, at least in a situation like Justin's, and I've been working in professional team environments, at least for the most part, everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction. You have a common goal that we all get to have a job next year if we win, right? Whereas it's very different in private. Number one, you have a kid that's getting pulled in a million different directions. And they don't all have the same common goal. Your high school coach doesn't have the same goal as the travel coach. It doesn't have the same goal as the private pitching coach. They all are, you know, the high school coach needs to win so he can have a job next year. The private coach wants to sell sessions. The travel coach wants to get more plaques for the wall so they can get more kids to sign up for their program. And so each of them are pulling in different directions, and they're not necessarily looking out for one another, in that they all want a piece of this. And so the biggest lesson that I try to teach, not just the parents, but also the kids, is that they have to be their own advocate. Is that especially like, and I did a fair amount of work in softball, where it's even a little bit different animal, where you generally have one ace that almost throws almost every game, especially at the high school level. And I say, what you have to avoid being is, you have to understand when you're good, and I've worked with some girls who are like really high level pitchers, is you're the coach's shiny toy. And I said, you have to be careful that they're going to pull out that shiny toy anytime they want to show that off. And I've had girls who were like player of the year, whose coach pulled them off of the bench after sitting in 40-degree rain for 2 hours because they were in some tournament, preseason tournament, and the team they were playing against said, oh, I thought we were going to get to see so-and-so pitch today. And they said, oh, come on, get up. And it was a shiny new toy that we're going to roll out to the mound and have her throw. And sure enough, she jacked up her shoulder from doing it. And that's why I've always had that conversation. You need to advocate, because we have kids who have to play on multiple teams, that they're playing travel and and their school or their town team simultaneously. And if those coaches don't communicate, which they're not going to, you need to have the parent, you need to have the kid advocate. Because if not, they're going to take that shiny toy, especially if you're good, and they're going to showcase it every chance they get. And we have to teach kids and parents how to protect them from themselves and from coaches who are going to be overzealous, who may not have your best interest at hand.
And I think Eric just hit the nail on the head right there. I was gonna say, when he's talking about advocating for yourself and throwing just a shiny new object, one player that I recently saw throws about 5 mile an hour faster than any one of his counterparts at his age group. And when I was telling him, I was like, hey, you might need a little bit more of a break throwing with the stress on the arm for that speed you're throwing. His dad looked up at me and he just goes, well, we threw the most innings this year than any other kid. And I was like, well, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to counter any type of recovery strategy behind that when you're having more stress than any other kid on the field as well. So Eric just second anything Eric just said on that. But what I would also say is I'm lucky a little bit as far as for the organization that I'm a part of. They have a strength and conditioning coach that works with those kids most of the time, or they all get seconds from them. So me and him going back and forth, if I'm seeing one of the players from that, it's pretty easy as far as my office is literally just right in the middle of the weight room that they're working with. But the one thing that's hard to juggle is he does a very good job at also understanding that these kids strength train with their high schools. So he's not only balancing what he's doing with the kids, but what they're already getting from their high school strength and conditioning coach as well. So, like I said, he does a very good job of balancing, knowing like getting info from them to figure out what he can supplement as far as just instead of just saying like, hey, this is my program, this is what I'm going to do, when it actually could be detrimental to the kid because they've already did something very similar with their high school. But as far as in the private sector of trying to reach out, I would say education and being their own advocate, like Eric was saying, is going to be key, because a lot of these kids, like Eric said, they're getting pulled every which direction. So they don't know what's necessarily the best. So as long as you can give them some education and being authentic and being real, as far as like, I mean, they can pull it out from you as well. They'll know if you're just trying to sell them something as well. So if you're telling them stuff that's best for them, and obviously we want to help, and if it's not, and they see that's not even a benefit to you, and you're just trying to help them continue their career, they're going to take it to heart, and they're going to do the best that they can to follow that advice.
Yeah, exactly. As you mentioned, protecting their career, because I've noticed that individuals who suffer, overuse injuries or different setbacks like that, their progress kind of goes like a roller coaster. They get better, and then we're sidelined for 6 weeks. We get better, we're sidelined for a month. Whereas if we can stay healthy, we just progressively improve over time. And, I know that we can't prevent every injury or that sort of thing. We have to kind of find a way to control our controllables. And I think you just hit a great point with that there, Nate and Eric, is, when we are looking at someone's program, we can try and connect with as many individuals as we can. But if they're lifting with their high school team and they're going to a private sector strength and conditioning facility on top of that, there's only so much we can do there. We're probably not going to get the high school strength coach to change what he's doing with the athletes. So how do we kind of go about finding a way to supplement and support what they're doing without kind of overdoing it? And I think that's a huge takeaway. And I know that's something that, Eric and I have discussed multiple times in the past, is trying to get smarter with what we give athletes from an exercise standpoint. And I think this is huge in a sport like baseball. And I'd love to hear your comments on this. Is, I feel like if we give the wrong exercises, then we start feeding the dysfunction, especially in pitchers. I think everyone is so quick to just slap rotator cuff strengthening at pitchers, when in reality, we haven't even assessed the pitcher, or, we're just doing 3x10 side lying ER/IR, or, banded ER/IR and expecting that's going to solve every issue for a pitcher. When in reality, I feel like there's more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I want to circle back to Eric's point about having these guys be their own advocates. And ironically, that applies so much to minor league and major league baseball. And I feel like the guys that represent what it is to be like a big leaguer and a big league veteran are the guys that like know their routine, know what they need, and advocate for themselves. And we spend a lot of time like teaching 16-year-old kids from the DR, like, hey, I need you to tell me what you want and what you need. And literally my first message to anybody that comes into rehab is that, hey, you guys know your body. I might know something about exercise and injuries, and I need you to communicate and collaborate with me so that we can be on the same page and you can tell me what you need. And like we're about to talk about, there's 1,600 different ways to do the same thing and to strengthen your rotator cuff. And at the end of the day, it's not necessarily like one specific exercise. It's the right exercise in the right amount at the right time, taken into consideration like a million different factors that we, mentioned when we're talking about load management. So I think it really depends like the time point we're looking at for these guys. And early on, if we're talking like early acute stages of rehab, if somebody's not throwing, if they're not really doing a ton of baseball activity, then great, let's load them up in anything that we can load them up in. So that way, when they get to the point that they're closer to return to play, they're at a point where they're at better performance than when they left, right? So like when they're not doing a ton of baseball specific activities, great, then we can do these 3 sets of 10 and like an immense amount of exercise and arm care and all that kind of stuff to supplement what they would be getting from throwing, so that they're more prepared when they go back to throwing. And then as we build through, like getting closer to the time point of high intent throwing and throwing off a mound and throwing to hitters, like some of that gets like withered away, and we tailor off what that looks like, and we become a lot more selective in terms of what we're applying and what we're choosing to do. I don't know that it's wrong to say that like rotator cuff strengthening is probably like, I'm sure if we ask anybody, that's probably the most important thing that anybody thinks of in baseball, but it's trying to figure out what the right like dosage of that is and like what the right timing of that is, that I think is the nuance that gets missed. And if it's just like, okay, well, your shoulder hurts, so just do a throwers 10 program, like that's not sufficient enough. And then on top of that, like that's not taking into account all the things that are specific to that athlete and everything else that they're doing, whether it's, working with their high school pitching coach, working with their specific pitching coach on my level, talking to their agent, talking to their friend's agent or their friend that does like pitching mechanics, and then trying to work with our pitching coach, right? Like there's those barriers that come into play that we have to consider and what they like doing in the first place. And then, like backtrack and get to the point where we're selecting the right exercise and in the right amount for them in that moment.
Yeah, I think the key to knowing how to sharpshoot it, and you really do have to sharpshoot it, because at any level, it's really a matter of there's only so much of this athlete to go around, and they're getting pulled in a million directions, as we already mentioned, the private sector. But even when you get to the professional level, they have to watch video, they have to go through all the mechanical stuff, they have analytical stuff they have to look at. There's travel, there's a ton of things that are fighting for that time. And so when they get to me, I don't have time to kind of guess. I have to kind of sharpshoot that. And having a really strong profile allows me to not waste time guessing. And so that profile is going to be unique in that what's one man's, fix is going to be another man's poison. So if I go and just, give a bunch of mobility work to somebody who's already hypermobile, but I don't know that because I didn't do any kind of level of profiling and evaluation, then I may make them really worse, but I gave them quote unquote baseball stuff that looks and feels like baseball. So unless kind of and ask, I'm a man of a million whys, kind of, all right, well, why did we get to this point? And then addressing it with the formula for what's going to fix that. Mobility is not going to fix an overuse injury because they just don't have the capacity to keep up with the workload. A bunch of rotator cuff strengthening is making the assumption that it's a strength issue. It's a localized strength issue. Maybe it's a motor control issue, which is not the same thing as strength. And it's not going to get fixed with band exercise and so forth. So being able to narrow that down, I think, is important. And then to kind of weave it all together, I think an important point, and Justin alluded to it earlier, is that it's not just us getting on the same page. I mean, the three of us could sit down and chop it up and figure out and put our egos aside and say, all right, you handle this, I'll take this, and you handle this. The elephant in the room is your skill coaches. and we could put together the most elegant program that we could, that we think we've we give it that chef's kiss. We've totally nailed it. And then you get a hard-nosed coach who goes out and runs 20 poles that day, or makes their pitchers do 2 hours of PFPs, and just screwed up 3 months of our work. So if we can't get on the same page as that and understand that this could all get it undone with one, hard ass practice, or one, hey, we're going to do something. In college, it's big when they start off in their spring, where they do these militant type of boot camp type of challenges, which will just undo everything I just did in the last 2 weeks.
You mean you don't like it when pitchers run poles, Eric? Really?
Oh, I should have worn my Stop Running Poles t-shirt that I got.
Yeah, I'm going to echo both of what Justin and Echo said. They done a pretty good job of hitting on everything I would hit on. Well, like Eric was saying, like being very specific and be a sharpshooter on what you hit on. Like I said earlier on, if there's some guys, if you look at just from a movement standpoint, their pitchers typically have what I would say like 7 things that go out on them. If you're not looking at them, and they don't all have them, or they don't all get all of them. But like if you're giving somebody a stabilization exercise and they're immobile, you're not going to make too much of a change for that person. Or the other way around, if they're super mobile and you're stretching them out, you're probably more of a detriment as them too. And then the same way, if we're all fighting for time and there's only so much time in a day, there's probably a million things that you should be doing as a baseball player. And a lot of it's beneficial, but if they only have a half hour to do it and you're prescribing an hour of things to do, then the player has no idea what's going to be the best bang for their buck. And they're just going to pick and choose what feels good. And we all know that what feels good isn't necessarily what's good for the player. You can have very, very tight feeling hamstrings, and which I've seen, and their active straight leg raise is way past 90. And for stretching that out, we're just creating more of a mobility issue instead of a stability issue, or instead of creating some stability. So really being fine-tuned with what you're looking at and knowing where to lead and I would say prioritize what you're looking at too. So do you prioritize mobility over stability? Do you prioritize shoulder mobility over hip mobility? And being really locked in on what you're looking for there, so that player is getting what he absolutely needs for there. And then you also kind of like we were saying, shoulder strength. If one of them's down, if you lose a few pounds of external rotation on your shoulder for strength, are we just loading them up with more external rotational rotator cuff strengthening, or did we factor in that they just threw 100 pitches the day before and they're actually just fatigued out, and we need a few more hours of recovery, or some local motor control for shoulder external rotation instead of just loading them up with band work or resistance work. So kind of factoring in there, and what we touched on earlier, getting in on like even some of the mental skills coaches too can really come into play too, to find out if they're not sleeping, or just talking with the player as well too, if they're not sleeping at night because they're super stressed. And obviously, to go back to the grip strength, then their grip strength may be down still because they're not getting enough rest. So having either questionnaires or just being locked in as making sure you're touching a few questions to your player to kind of screen them on where they're at psychologically as well. Hydration, sleep, all that plays a factor into trying to be a sharpshooter on how to completely better that athlete in the least amount of time.
And taking that a step further, remembering that the athletes are not just baseball players, they're also people. So, if you're at the pro level, working with some of these guys that Justin has, they might be coming in from a different country and there might be a language barrier and they've got to adjust to, living in a whole new place. They might be married or dating someone. They might have kids or a dog or something like that. And there might be some personal life factors that get thrown into the mix as well. And, I know it's easy to think of a sport like baseball, especially at the pro level, as baseball is, their whole life. But there's a lot of other factors that go into the picture as well. And, again, we control what we can, but we also have to consider the fact that, we're working with people just as much as we're working with athletes. And, no one person is going to be perfect about every single thing. So we have to find new ways to adjust and accommodate for those days when things are not perfect, you know, for the night that, you know, your star pitcher only gets 5 hours of sleep, or the night where, you know, your pitcher's 20 minutes late to his session because, you know, his dog was sick or something like that. Like, you have to be willing to understand where they're coming from as a person, I think, and be able to adjust and account for all the personal factors just as well as the physical performance-based ones, I would say.
I think, you know, again, I'm really fortunate that we have, you know, like resources and time, but with that, like at the end of the day, these guys are still people, right? And I think, especially in the setting that I'm in, where guys are dealing with, you know, like 14 to 16 month injuries, or you know, long-term injuries, like they have to figure out how to live life and not compete. And we're, again, really fortunate that we have like a team around us, to be able to, you know, like get to know these guys, get to know them as people and outside of baseball, and then provide them with like life skills to be able to function as, you know, like adults in society. Because some of these guys are, again, coming from different countries and literally learning how to speak English. And if we can't create a culture within rehab and within the Phillies where we can like empower them to grow, then we're doing them a disservice, right? And I think, again, we're really fortunate that we have resources to be able to do that. And the people around me are incredible, right? You're sitting here talking about like somebody not getting a good night's sleep and having to show up and still pitch the next day. And one of the things that our mental performance coach talks to these guys about is like showing up. Some days you're going to show up with like your D stuff, and you're still going to have to be able to go out there and compete with your D stuff. And that's going to be, you're going to have to be okay with that, right? Like the first time a guy's going to throw a bullpen after having TJ, like it's probably not going to go well performance wise, and they're probably going to be upset about it because it didn't go the way they wanted it to, or they didn't throw as hard as they wanted to, or they didn't throw as many strikes as they wanted to. And it's all about like helping them gain the tools to be able to manage those expectations and have realistic goals throughout the rehab process and throughout life, right? Because those same things apply to when I show up for work and I've got my D stuff for that day because I'm tired or stressed from whatever else is going on in my life. I got to be able to figure it out and provide the best care that I can with my D stuff that day. So the same thing applies. And I feel like we're really fortunate, again, that we have the time and the resources to be able to commit and get to know these guys on a personal level, and then help them identify areas where they can grow and be not only better athletes, but better people at the end of the day, right?
You made a
Justin,
huge...
I love it.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, Justin, I love the fact that you talked about like taking them out of the competitiveness of them. Because that was one of the biggest things I saw at the Twins was like guys that come to the rehab facility, like you just essentially strip them away from their whole team. And this isn't a bad thing. This is just this is how it's kind of done so they can get the proper care that they need and stuff like that. But if you talk about like an identity stress, like one, they're not competing like you said. Two, they're just not around they're good friends that they've just been around for a whole season if it's a mid-season injury. And then three, like for in a rehab facility or rehab area, the way it was set up, like you're around guys that are in a very similar situation, which can be beneficial, but it can also be detrimental because they're all not competing if they're just talking to the guys that are in rehab. So like if you talk about a stressor that they have to be able to monitor to figure out where their rehab status is and anything like that, that's a huge, like I said, it's almost like not an identity crisis, but it's an identity loss a little bit because they're not doing what they're known for. But then it's like in a private sector, you kind of forget about that a little bit because they're still going to school, they're still going to see the same people. But like if you're not on the field, you don't have that competitiveness with it to compete against other people. At least you can compete with yourself with a little bit more of a harder drive than it is to compete with other people. And you can see that in basically any type of performance way. If you're competing against other people, you're gonna typically make better gains than you are if you're just trying to compete against yourself in most cases. So love that you mentioned that, Justin.
Yeah, I think in professional baseball, it's really hard when guys get sent down here to Florida or to Arizona for other teams. Like everybody like tries to resist it and say, oh, I don't need to go down. But if you think about like the access to facilities that guys have on traveling on the road, league players and even major league players, man, some of those weight rooms are tough. So like to have the ability to come to like a facility where you have everything that you need and you can simulate whatever you need is an immense benefit. But that personality and identity issue of like, well, I'm down here in Florida, they totally forgot about me, I don't matter, is really hard. And I think, again, I'm really fortunate that like our strength coach and our pitching coach and the other physical therapists around me have helped to create a culture where we're trying to like challenge these guys to be the best at what they can be doing at that time, like in that moment, and try to create, like some camaraderie of what they get in an actual team while they're here. And it's never the same, but like, I feel like that's a huge piece that gets missed, where these guys just, and even again, like you said, in the private sector, where we just forget that like, oh, coach probably forgot about me because I can't play for 8 weeks. So what am I going to do? And I don't have any importance anymore at this point because I can't play. So how can we help these athletes like find that and remember that they're on their way back to that, right?
Those are awesome points. And I think rapport and trust is also really important, because for anybody listening to it, obviously the three of us could sit here and geek out about training baseball players for forever, but realize that all the players that come to us, they don't love it. Right. They're not like, to steal the Kenny Powers line, I'm here to be the best in my sport. I ain't here to be the best at exercising. Right. So they're not all excited about when I explain to them how to do a 6-point carry or something like that. So I have to be able to get their trust to say, look, this is what's going to lead to this. And it's about having some, adult conversations of what we can have some trade-off with to get them to buy in, because they're not all jacked up to do it. And then the other thing from the mental stressors is, when people hear about, working with major leaguers, they're thinking, okay, we're working with all, $20 million a year guys who have, mansions and yachts and all that sort of stuff, where for every one of those guys that you see on ESPN, there's independent league guys who are doing DoorDash, who are just trying to get a job for $5,000 a year. And they're trying to keep that job to hang on a little more to maybe get a chance to get their dream. And so you talk about stress, like you don't know if you have a job every day. Though there's a way more guys like that at any professional sport that are right on that razor's edge. And that is extremely stressful. And learning how to manage that in your training volume is another factor to consider.
The one thing I feel like we haven't discussed on yet is the whole process of return to sport. So say, an athlete's been seeing Justin for a while and they're getting ready to get back into the game, or, say Nathan's got a long-term rehab and they're looking to get cleared to go back in. We didn't really touch on too many of the different return to sport testing criteria in the episode today. I'd love to hear from each of you a little bit about what kind of things you look at when you've got an athlete who's been out or sidelined for a long period of time. What kind of things are you looking at and assessing to determine their, return to sport eligibility or readiness, or whatever, term you want to throw at it there? And, I really want to hit that from also the strength and conditioning element that you have there, Eric, and some of the movement quality type background that you have as well. So
what I always kind of say, like, we want the endpoint speed and hold, and that's where we start from. So where do we want to get to when we're get them either throwing or get them back onto the field? I like to use a lot of objective stuff, a lot of objective data, because as we all know, if we try to be subjective and just deal with is it painful or not, we're going to miss a lot of different things. And there's a lot of different factors that can go into why they got injured, as like we just talked about. So typically what I'm looking for, if we're talking baseball, so we're talking an upper body injury for the most part. Obviously there's other things, but we typically think of shoulder, elbow, for baseball. So some of the stuff that we already touched on, what I like to look at is grip strength. Is it normalized compared to what it was previously, if we had that data before? If not, and we don't have the data from before, is it at least what it is from the non-throwing side? And then do we have a little bit of an increase overhead as opposed to down to the side? Shoulder strength, is it normalized? I like to look at even versus IR, so the ratio, is it between 0.8 to 1, ER to IR ratio? Is it the same as your non-throwing side? Or is it a little bit, or is it a little bit better, is it a little bit worse? So all this stuff, I would want all that stuff normalized too. And then you get into a little bit more functional testing as far as upper quarter Y balance, so closed kinetic chains testing. Is that equal and both sides symmetrical? And does the composite score equal what it needs to be? Lower quarter Y balance, does that equal what it needs to be for a composite score and symmetrical? Then we go just even to like an FMS. Is there no zeros and ones on it? Is there any asymmetries? Shoulder total arc, shoulder range of motion, flexion, ER, IR, extension, is that all normalized? Especially, and then cervical range of motion, is that normalized in a pitcher? Ankle dorsiflexion, even this big one, thorax rotation, to see if they have any limitations in that. But all that stuff is what I would want to make sure to even begin to start progressing higher end activity. And then if you get even into higher level testing as far as broad jump or med ball chest pass, where I'd be working with Eric a little bit to figure out where we need to go in that realm, in the strength conditioning realm, to make sure that they're getting all the power output, all the postural integrity and elastic energy control that they should be able to withstand the stressors of their sport. And once all that's a lot of stuff that I just listed, but until you get all that stuff normalized and start progressing, then you start to progress a little bit more of a return to sport, as far as like maybe that's when you start doing some return to your interval throwing program to make sure that they're not, like we talked about before, like an acute chronic workload ratio. So you're not just bombarding and jumping up their acute workload and then just get re-injured again after you just normalized everything, made them super strong, made them super a good mover, and then all of a sudden you just go back to square one because you loaded them too quick. So that's where there's a lot of stuff there, but that's essentially where I would start, and then try to normalize everything that you find. And like we talked about, be a sharpshooter where they're deficient in those areas and attack that really hard until all that stuff gets kind of normalized.
Yeah, Nate hit some really good points there. To quote the Jay-Z line, the numbers don't lie, check the scoreboard. So is that like, I need to know some objective data, and that's why that profile up front is important, because I want to know, like, if their broad jump did decrease by 6 inches, well, that means their lower body power isn't what it was previously. Now they go on the mound and they're trying to get back to the same velo. They're going to have to get that from someplace else. And that's going to mean they're going to probably overuse a part that we just rehabbed, right? Or if they're maybe because they've been sitting so much and they're not doing their normal activities, they're not on their feet as much, and now they've lost a foot length off their stride. And now that's going to take a couple ticks off their velo, and they're going to try to make it up someplace else. So I want to make sure everything gets back to an acceptable level and not look at that on a very local thing. So even if you're coming back from TJ or a shoulder thing, I'm looking at all those other factors, regardless of what your injury is, because those are the things that usually get lost because we don't think about that. There's some of the highest correlations from a movement standpoint or the lower body Y balance test in terms of arm injuries. So I want to look at everything to make sure what thumbprint has this left. And if it means that you lost dorsiflexion on your landing leg, that's going to end up leading to something coming back at some point. And so that's why you see a lot of players who come back and they have a setback because something else was triggered, because their normal activities changed and their normal training changed. And then the other last point I would say, and Nate brought it up really well, is you got to really get the athlete to understand that this isn't a green and red type of situation, that there's going to be shades of gray all along there, that you're not just either good or not good, that there's steps to this. You don't just go out and throw 95 at max velocity in high pressure situations after not throwing at all. We have to learn how do we ramp this up properly.
Both Nate and Eric really hit on the most important thing, is that it's holistic, right? Like Nate listed off like 20 different metrics that you want to look at, and we want to look at the whole picture of these guys. And again, I'm really fortunate that we have like a pre-participation, like physical to go back to and say like, hey, what did this guy look like when he wasn't hurt or when he was healthy? Or if it's somebody that's been with the org for a long time, like what did he look like X number of years ago? So we can like reverse engineer these things and see like where that looks. But I think obviously these guys hit the nail on the head. I think the only thing that I'll add in terms of like return to throwing is like some sort of like a pre-throwing plyometric program, right? Like they should be doing some sort of throwing or exercise to simulate throwing, whether that's med balls, whether that's some sort of like use of a weighted ball. So that way, when they go to throw, that's not the hardest thing that they've ever done since they last threw, right?
Right. I like that point a lot. And, you mentioned too, Justin, that's the beauty of having the facility like you guys have in the long-term setting there, where you have pretty much unlimited access to whatever you need. No, I think you guys did a great job hitting so many different return to sport criteria and considerations. And as you mentioned, it's a continuum. It's not a full green light or full red light. You can continue to move forward or move back from that state. And while certain things might meet where you were before, other things might be lagging behind. And as you mentioned, that's the essential part of looking at everything before the athlete goes back and trying to give them some kind of baseline, some kind of, score or just overall data of where they're at and where they need to be. I love how you all brought up the points of reverse engineering as well. You have the end goal in mind. Now we just have to build the steps backwards from there to get them to that point. I know we're running a little short on time, but I would love to hear if there's any sort of things that y'all have noticed amongst the youth sports lately, especially youth baseball. I know we can talk about, the pro guys or D1 college guys, and that's all the excitement and ESPN and that sort of thing. But there's another generation of them coming up right now that might be, in the Little League World Series, or maybe they're just, middle of nowhere farm town playing, travel ball or something like that. Is there anything outside of running polls that you've noticed as like concerning, or things that you want to, in your mind, you would like to see changed in the youth athletic world for baseball?
Do we have like 2 hours, Dan?
I
can run with this one.
we might have to do a whole separate podcast on that one.
So I had two boys that played all the way up into college, and then I coached youth baseball for up until last year. So probably about almost 15 years of coaching youth baseball. And it has basically become organized child abuse. When people are asking, well, when you talk about that device, I'm like, that is a gateway drug for psycho dads to destroy their kids. When you hear about, well, what's the best ice pack for my kid's arm? As I say, ice is for trauma. Like if you get punched in the face, you get hit with a ball, it's for trauma. Then you shouldn't be doing anything that traumatic to a 12-year-old's arm, that they need ice to begin with. Not to mention getting into the research that it doesn't work, and it actually works against what you think it's going to do. So like getting that mindset to change is really hard. And I can tell you, because I've been in it as a parent, there's that fear of missing out. Well, if I don't do this, then if I don't get my kid on the, because it's driven in by, and it's really just a cash grab of, if you don't play on the spring team, you won't be on the summer team. If you don't play in the fall team, you won't make the spring team. And so kids are dropping out of their other sports. You have kids that are dedicating themselves just to one thing, and they're getting burnt out. And what it's producing, and I'm sure, Justin, you could talk about this, it's producing highly skilled, underperforming athletes who have been taught very mechanically how to play a game that also has a huge artistic element to it. And, and that's why one of my favorite things when I coached youth baseball is when we went to a sleepaway tournament. As much as I despise tournaments with a passion, I can go for an hour on that, is I love the fact that we would go and all of my little superstars would get their asses handed to them by a team from another state. Because then I would have the parents at dinner that night say, just understand that team from Maryland that just mercied us 28-0, that they're going to go to Florida with kids who play year round, and they're going to lose 28-0. And that team from Florida will go to the Dominican Republic, and they will lose 28-0 with a bunch of kids with milk cartons for gloves. And so you're so far down the food chain that understand that it doesn't really matter what ice pack you buy, little Johnny. All right. If I don't reel myself in, I'll go all night. So let me let these other guys go. You can tell that this is a tender spot for me.
Yeah, those are all good points though. That's, like you said, we can go on for hours on this. Let's see, I'll explain one thing out here. I'll pick out one thing. So Eric already hit what the youth sports look at, but one big thing that I notice is, a lot of the guys that I see right now, They come with an elbow or shoulder injury. Ask them what their throwing routine is for non-pitcher or anything like that. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, well, what's your warm up? What's your quote unquote warm up nose? Like, well, we go out to 150, 180 every day. Like, well, hey, it's like the long toss is supposed to be development. I was like, do you squat every day? And they're like, no. I was like, what happens if you do? He's like, it's going to go down. I was like, correct. I was like, so why are you doing a very high velocity throwing every day? And they're like, well, no, we were told long toss increases velo. It's like, yeah, if you recover from it, but you're not going to be able to recover from it in 24 hours. So a lot of times, the first step I do is change their essentially throwing program, and what do you know, their elbow doesn't hurt with not too much intervention to it.
I don't know if I can follow up, Eric, but to piggyback off of Nate, in baseball and probably in most sports, we all think more is better. It's always more wins, more throwing, more lifting, more teams, more recovery, and I mean, obviously we all know that's not true. So I think we've laid out that it's trying to do the right thing at the right time and the right amount, and we lose that a lot, especially in youth sports when we've got the next LeBron James on our team.
Yeah, the business of youth sports. It's and as we mentioned before off air, it's incredible to me just how much money gets caught up in these things sometimes as well. We're seeing, families invest sometimes 5 figures into their kids' athletic endeavors, and I'm all for supporting the next generation. But as Eric mentioned so eloquently, as Eric mentioned so well, sometimes there's individuals with far less than us that are absolutely whooping us at our sport. So sometimes it's not a matter of what money can buy us, but it's a matter of, how we can work in a more effective, efficient, and intelligent manner with the resources that we have. It makes me think back to a personal story as well. A long time ago, I had a friend, Joel Bennett, on the podcast, who pitched for the Boston Red Sox and Philadelphia Phillies. And as we were sharing his journey and story, he talks about how he grew up using a rock as a baseball because he couldn't afford a baseball, and using a old 2x4 as a bat because he couldn't afford one. And yet he was still somehow, able to make it into, Citi Field, Fenway Park, that whole sort of thing. So just because you don't have the resources doesn't mean that you should give up on your dream. And just because you have all the resources in the world doesn't guarantee you a spot in the big leagues, I'll say. But as Eric mentioned, we can talk about that all night long. As we start to wrap up here, is there any other closing thoughts, closing remarks, or anything else that you guys want to bring up that we didn't yet?
I think the one thing I would add, just from my lean on things, is that I think we underestimate and underappreciate just general athleticism in baseball, because it's such a highly skilled sport with very, very specific, even within the positioning and differences between all different positions. Is that if you wanted to really be successful in the sport, I think what you need to do is look at yourself as an athlete first. And if you look at players who are really successful at the highest levels, they almost never, it's not what they played at 9U is what they're playing now at the major league level. But unfortunately we have dads that say, hey, I picked this kid at 8 years old to be the third baseman. He's going to be the third baseman, for the rest of his life. That's not the case. Some of the greatest players, Jacob deGrom was a shortstop. You look at all the, players like the Yankees have, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa can play all 9 positions. That is what's going to give you value. That's what's going to probably keep you the most healthy, give you the most robust profiles, to be really, really athletic. And then the skill stuff comes a lot easier. It's a lot easier to acquire the skills of hitting and throwing and fielding when you're really athletic to begin with. If you have someone that the only time they do anything is to get dropped off at a paid for lesson, and they don't even carry in their own bag, that's like the path to doomsday in this sport. I think you need to really be athletic first and then build your skill on top of that.
We have too much just like Eric said, set the foundation, because I think I just saw something today as far as like what makes the greats is being able to get into a position that doesn't look like a normal baseball position, but then still create force from it. So being able to throw hard from a arm close to the ground, or being kind of disordered to make the quick throw to first or anything like that. But they may have made that throw one time and that was it in the game. So how do you develop that? You're gonna, like Eric said, you're gonna have to have athleticism. You're gonna have to be able to pick that up from another sport. You're gonna have to pick that up from the development and other areas besides just being on a baseball field. So set your foundation good from a movement, strength, power, performance capacity, and then take that to the field and the skill. Like Eric said again, the skill will come a lot quicker.
Yeah, I'll only echo that and say, like we talked about, these guys especially pitchers do one exact movement over and over again, and if we're not providing some kind of like movement variability to help them develop, like it's really, really difficult for them to succeed. And then the other piece that gets missed, especially in youth sports and just even at professional level, is that we get to play a game for a living, and I get to watch people play a game for a living, and like we got to make sure we have fun while we do it, right? Like just because you're trying to make the major leagues, just because you're trying to make your travel ball team, like you still got to be able to have fun while you're doing it. Otherwise, what are you doing it for?
I love those points. Love that. For people who have listened today and maybe they want to check out more about you guys and that sort of thing, where can they find you at on social media, online? Eric, I won't make the MySpace joke this time. I know I've made that like the past 5 times we've been together. Where can they find you at online?
So I shouldn't reference my MySpace then?
I mean, you can if you want. I'm on MySpace right now, actually.
I think you can ask Jeeves for it.
MySpace is still up and running, I think.
Love it. Well, for me, it's simple. It's just my name. Just go to Eric Dagati, EricDagati.com, and you have all my social media and everything in there. If you have any questions, there's an Ask Eric thing on the main page. Put that on there. Plus, you have all the ways you can contact me.
I'm not a big social media guy, but we can put my email up for guys if they want to reach out.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then if you want to reach out to me or anything, my website's integratedperformanceteam.com. Email is nathan@integratedperformanceteam.com. And then Instagram is just integrated.performance. Twitter is Nate.
Gotcha. We'll link to all of that in the description below too. So if you didn't quite catch that, you can just click there. Justin, Nate, Eric, I really appreciate you guys' time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Good seeing you
thanks
guys.
a lot. This is fun.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, I want to take a second and tell you all about AliRx. AliRx is a at-home food sensitivity and gut health testing panel. You order online and then receive and complete your test at home for food sensitivities. You then receive a custom report online through your member portal, and then receive personalized recipes and supplements that are catered to you based on your food sensitivities. If this is something that interests you, you can check out the link and description in my bio, and you can use the coupon code capital D, capital B, RAUN, capital RX, so D Brawn RX, at checkout to save yourself 20%. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to share it with a friend, subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, and leave a review. This way we can spread knowledge and motivation and help reach more people. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.